Okay. It is noon and we are recording. I see the recording light now. So, welcome back to Welty at Home, the slow reading virtual book club that alternates work by Eudora Welty with work by authors connected to Welty. Today, we continue our series exploring the correspondence of Eudora Welty and Ross Macdonald. And meanwhile, there are letters edited by Suzanne Mars and Tom Nolan. During the series, we will continue to read and discuss about a chapter each week. My name is Anna Traylor. I am the Special Projects Coordinator at Eudora Welty House and Garden, and we are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and Professor Emerita at Millsaps College, for guiding these discussions. First, some quick housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select Raise Hand. If you are on a tablet or a phone, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear. And a lively discussion takes place in the chat as well, so be sure to glance over at that chat box every now and again. But if you find yourself unable, I do collect the weekly chat transcripts to send at the end of our series. If you would like access to this working transcript document, please reach out to me at info@eudoraweltyhouse.com. With that, Suzanne, would you take it away with today's discussion?
All right. Well, before we begin our discussion of Chapter 4, meanwhile, there are letters 1974, I wanted to ask Melissa Fox to say a little bit about a project she has underway, which is relevant to our discussion, and you may want to turn to it during our discussions. And that is, well, I'm going to let you give the title of it, Melissa. It's a project done with the Welty Digital Lab here at Millsaps, Michael Pickard and his students, and it concerns Welty in the newspaper articles about Eudora Welty. Melissa, you can explain everything.
So for about a year, I've been collecting articles about Eudora Welty in the newspaper. After the Welty conference in Jackson, I reached out to Michael Pickard. He runs a project called the Digital Welty Lab, and he has helped me, along with a student that's dedicated to this project, to bring my research to a digital humanities collection. The link is in the chat. It's called A Piece of News. I want to first say it is early days still. There are about 2,000 articles on the site right now. Most of them have images of the articles, but there are still kinks that we're working out, and we have big goals for this project and what we hope it can become. Michael's student has been amazing. Michael has been amazing. So a huge thank you to them for getting this going. But as we read these letters, the connection I'm going to make today is that we hear Welty and Ken talk about sharing news clippings with each other. And so I've been thinking about not only articles about Welty in the newspaper, but how she found herself in the newspaper. So on this website, you can search. The articles are mapped. Anna has, I think, yeah, she can share the screen. So you can view them on the map where they appear in the world. And we hope this can grow. So I have access to a certain number of databases and collections that I continue to find, but it would be one goal I have is that some crowdsourcing can be done to get access to articles from other parts of the world that I don't have access to, that Welty would have appeared in the newspaper. When you click on a number on the site, it kind of zooms in and then you can see sort of articles in that area. There are a great way to start using the site is to look at the subjects page. As I'm going through each article, I'm giving it subject that I hope researchers can link back to. So if you click on the title of a book, like Curtain of Green, you're going to find not only reviews of advertisements that came up anytime it was mentioned in the newspaper for any reason. So while this is a great way for me to sort of analyze the work that I'm doing, I hope that other scholars and just researchers generally will be able to make use of the site and more projects will come from it. Right now, there's just a wide range of dates, but I would say the most complete set that's there at this time to the databases that I have access to is from 1920 to about 1940. And those articles are Welty's like articles as a youth appearing in the newspaper. A great one about her hosting a Halloween party at her house in 1920, all the way through the society columns that she wrote and that she appeared in, and also great articles about her just generally in Jackson society. So arts kind of things, helping with the little theater. There's just photography. She taught photography classes, her involvement with the Jackson Girl Scouts. So there's some interesting connections for people who might be interested in kind of a local history lens to view Welty through. Um, so I hope that people start to look at the site. We're sharing it now kind of early to get feedback, but also to hopefully get scholars inspired to start using it. So thanks for that time, Suzanne. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful.
I'm reminded when you're talking about Halloween party of another Halloween party much later, where Anne and Bill Morrison and Charlotte Capers came to the Halloween party in costume, and when they knocked on the door, they were all dressed like witches, and they each had a little cardboard thing, and one read, "Which is which? Which is which?"
That's rich.
Yeah, that's rich. Yeah. All right. Well,
I was just going to say I'm loving seeing this, Melissa, but the link isn't in the chat.
Oh.
Put the link in the chat because I want it.
Okay.
yeah, I told you they'd be avid after you, Melissa. Melissa wants to know if scholars would be interested. I said, "Oh yeah, oh yeah." I was hoping that there might be some about, but you may not have gotten that far about Eudora Welty Day and the coverage of Eudora Welty Day.
There definitely is. Yep.
Oh,
And
good.
you can search by year. So there's, ways to search a site. It's a little finicky, but you can search by year, and that would be a way to come up with that. I think I added Welty Day as a subject. So as those articles appear, that should be a subject on the subjects page too.
Great. So that will go back to what we were talking about last time. Well, today we have chapter 4, and I thought I have some topics sketched out, and you can take over and take us in a different direction anytime any of you want to. But the topics I have sketched out for us to talk about first are what we learn about the relationship between Ken and Eudora in 1974, what we learn about their joint experience of writer's block, talking about the books on which they are working, about their appreciation of music, about other literary figures. So those were the main topics I wanted us to talk about today, and feel free to take us in a different direction should you want to. Anyone, feel free. So let's start off by talking about the relationship, and I'm interested first off in what is not said. What Ken doesn't say about Margaret, what he doesn't say about Reynolds and Eudora Welty Day, and what Eudora doesn't say about John Robinson. I wondered if anyone noticed that and wanted to talk about those letters and omissions from those letters. Let me look first in my book, it's on page 214. And this is Tom's note about Brad Derrick's visit to, did I pronounce his name correctly, Tom? I think I did. Derrick's visit to Ken Miller.
Yeah. I think it was Brad Dara.
Derrick. All right.
Dara. I think it's a Scottish sort of name.
Yeah. And he says in our note, I'm sure that Tom wrote this note, but I'll take credit for it too. People's Brad Derrick witnessed the bleak tension often apparent in Ken and Margaret's union. I had the feeling he was manacled to his wife, Derrick would recall much later, and maybe she to him. I was aware of the ravine in their marriage. Something very fundamental had happened between them, and I felt it had reached the point where there was barely civility. and it all centered around the daughter, I'm sure. So if we might start there, and none of that is mentioned, I think, in the letters. Do you have any sense of that from the letters? Or any sense of what's going on? Harriet, were you? Did
I think there is. It does come out in the letters a little bit. You know, when he's talking about Margaret may not write again, and the maybe a feeling of tension between them about his writing and success, and um, her
matching Edgar?
yeah, that's right. The matching Edgar's. I mean, she's had this um, uh, very successful career early in their relationship, and now things have shifted a little bit. Plus, she's lost her daughter, and she is not writing, and so I think it comes out a little bit in the letters. But I was really interested in the Derek interview as well.
Mhm. Well, it should be in your index at some point, perhaps not. Kind of thing.
Oh, I think it is, yeah.
But certainly, Linda dying had a profound negative impact on Maggie. As Ken said, not only she stopped writing, she stopped reading for a while. They seem to have different reactions towards Linda, not necessarily towards her death, but towards her life and her behavior and everything that she sort of put her parents through, if you want to look at it from that aspect. And somebody pointed out to me, I think, that in their books, there are dramatically different reactions to a situation with a troublesome daughter or a troublesome relative. Ken's attitude, his hero's attitude, was always, save the victim. Like in Sleeping Beauty, he's a prolonged search for the missing girl, and with youngsters, try and save them if they're troubled, and help them to become well and useful, proper members of society. Be healed. Margaret wrote a book after she resumed writing. I think it was Mermaid, about a troubled young woman and a relative, perhaps her mother. Somebody says finally, exasperatedly, how much can you do? How much can you be expected to do? And she sort of writes off the situation and the child, the young person. It's a markedly different reaction of the two authors and perhaps the two people, what it's worth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Monica.
Yeah, I appreciate the topics you bring up, especially we can see it, I think, in the letter just after the bit that you were talking about there, Ken's August 5th letter to Eudora, where the opening paragraph is so lovely and references her blithe spirit when she's in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'm really struck. First, he talks about that, the trouble that he's having, I'm the victim of my books. And then he says, of course, I have more responsibilities now. My wife, my grandson, my two young dogs. Margaret is physically well, but unable to write for several years now. She doesn't need it, but she used to enjoy it and depend on it. Um, and that just seems so like kind of stark and brief. And that also just like my wife, my grandson, my dogs. The bit about Margaret is kind of brief. And then anytime he talks about his grandson, he's just, immediately becomes a bit more effusive, and you can tell how much he enjoys his grandson and quite frankly his dogs. So it's interesting to compare the kind of brief bit about Margaret to Jim and the dogs.
That's really interesting, Monica, and I hadn't even thought about it in those terms. But yeah, whenever he talks about Jimmy, he's effusive. What a wonderful boy he is. And when he talks about the two dogs, Duffy and Sky, oh, Margaret, oh, that's so sad. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he has he has happy things to say about the other topics.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting what he said about his sister-in-law too. and her care for her husband,
Yeah.
and that kind of quality that he never sort of identifies in her sister and Margaret. What about Eudora? The other one thing I wanted to mention him not talking about, and this is on page 194, and I'll give you the date of the letter, which is the letter of March 19th. March 19th. He says, I should have answered before that I have no objection to your sending Reynolds my rather fragmentary speech. I would divulge anything I knew or remembered to Reynolds Price. Indeed, I love him. He is so complex and complete in his candor, both spoken and written, which is all of a piece. Not the least of the glories of Eudora Welty Day was the opportunity it presented for such friendships. You know their names. What pleasure you must take in them. So he's talking about how wonderful it was to be with Reynolds on Eudora Welty Day, and that's during that time was when he told Reynolds, you love Eudora as a friend, I love her as a woman, but that's not mentioned here to Eudora. Much more circumspect than to mention that. But he said he would tell Reynolds anything, and in fact he did. Joe Ellen. I can't hear you.
Thanks. I was just going to say that I've been kind of watching a progression in the years. And the first chapter, there's real excitement, just kind of, getting to know each other, very personal. In the second chapter, the longest one by about twice the length of the other ones, that's just really all over the place, talking about people, etc. In the third one, they are much more personal, I think, about their own professional lives, but much more personal. They both use stupid again, for example. Welty talking about the daily demands, stupid things that she's exasperated by. And then later, I think Ken uses stupid about missing her at the Algonquin. So there's a lot of talk in this one also about trying to get together. The Santa Barbara conference is in the works, but Welty is very for direct, that saying she's not built for doing my civic duties, but as a Southern woman, she keeps doing every one of them. I also noticed that in the same way that they kind of tiptoed through the valedictions in their letters early on, in this chapter, Margaret's forgotten a lot of the time. Not much love to both of you, that kind of thing. They're much more focused on each other personally, I think.
Thanks. Oh, Harriet.
So I'm just thinking about the um, the my interest in this moment of intersection between Ken, her relationship with Ken and wanting to see him, and the invitation to come to the Santa Barbara conference, and her having planned a trip to Europe, and her being about to see John Robinson and his partner in Italy, and this her sidestepping, introducing the story of John as she says that she's visiting an old friend, and will go with him and his friend for the weekend when she arrives. But there's for somebody who's followed her story with John Robinson, there's a interesting silence about that story, which is certainly something that she's been quiet about since the 50s, I think. I mean, her letters, whatever she wrote about that period has disappeared, as opposed to all the letters that have been collected.
Right. I think this is really interesting. For those of you who don't know, Eudora was romantically involved with a man named John Robinson, John Fraser Robinson, from maybe 1937 when they went on a trip to Mexico together, probably in advance of that, until about 1952 when he either told her or she realized uh, that he was gay and that the young man he was living with was his partner, Enzo Giannani. I hope I pronounced Enzo's name correctly. And so this was, and when she first knew that this was going to be a hopeless situation, uh, I think there was some, pulling back from the friendship. But the friendship survived, and now here in 1974, uh, almost 40 years after it began, she's going to see him, and she's going to see him with his friend. And she mentions that in the letter of June 14th. By the way, I was really interested that she was traveling tourist class, same way she went the first time. uh, so she says, an old friend from home who now lives in Italy is meeting the boat in Genoa, and I'll go home with him and friend for the weekend near Pisa. So none of the history with John Robinson is there. And why it's not there is an interesting question. It may just be because it's no longer really that important
Yeah.
to her. It may be that she wants to protect John. She doesn't say anything about John's circumstances. So she was very careful about protecting him always.
Mhm.
And or it may be that she doesn't want to talk about a period that was very painful in his life, and she's not going there. So anyway, Laura.
I thought it was interesting because they seem so keen on sharing contacts, sharing
Mhm.
connections, sharing other writers. Um, but
Yeah,
I
she
was
doesn't
curious.
even mention his name. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Or the day he was a writer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I I was interested when they started communicating again after her trip to Europe, and in the letter from August 5th, Ken refers to how he enjoyed her bulletins from Italy and France. And I was curious what those were, if they were postcards or if there's any record of how she was telling him about what she did.
If we'd had them, we would have included them in the book because we didn't exclude anything. But I'm pretty sure they would have been postcards. She used to say,
Okay.
"I'll postcard you." She would tell people that.
I love that as a verb.
Yeah. So I think that she's been sending postcards all along, uh, and they've just not made it, or else they're in somebody's private collection someplace.
Well, I just thought it was interesting though, in terms of like what Joellen said about there being less mention of Margaret and the fact that a postcard is more open. Like
Mhm.
it arrives in the mail and whoever gets the mail gets to read what's on the back. So I thought if those were postcards, I was thinking about, I just made me curious. Of course, we'll never know, but like what she was writing and who would have received them.
Your postcard goes to China Grove, Mississippi. It's read by the postmistress. So there you are. So yeah, not as private. Uh, I think those all these efforts to meet are interesting too. And then the one time when they really could have met, of course, they missed connections. Yeah. But one thing that interested me was who tried to facilitate these meetings, Mary Lou and Reynolds. And so Reynolds is trying to schedule a meeting, and Reynolds knows very well the nature of the affection between these two, and he's trying to get them to come to Duke, and they don't manage to do that. And then Mary Lou, who I don't know for a fact that she knew about this, but I suspect that she did because she visited. They had many private conversations, and she's trying to arrange a meeting in Santa Fe where she and her partner Agnes Sims live. So, so that was interesting to me as well. Yeah, Harriet.
I thought it was interesting back in the last chapter when Dermot makes a comment about Ken's tenderness,
Mhm.
that he's also recognizing the importance of this relationship, and is talking to her about it. It seems in that comment. Um, uh, how much, you don't know, but it's to comment on his tenderness seems to me to be an intimate kind of,
Oh.
yeah.
Tom Barnaby Conrad writes to invite Eudora to Santa Barbara, and which she will go 3 different times to the Santa Barbara Writers Conference, just not this time. Uh, uh, was he I'm sure he was doing that for the sake of the Santa Barbara Writers Conference, not out of friendship to Ken, right? Or both.
Well, probably both. Certainly be a fine feather on the festival's cap to have Miss Welty there. And he invited all kinds of people, William Styron went there, and Elmore Leonard and various people, national figures. Miss Welty, by the way, also, when she mentioned to me about Dermot mentioning that Ken was a very tender person. And she said Dermot would notice that because he was such a person himself. Yeah, Barnaby would have, and his wife wanted her there, and we're very proud to have her.
Oh. So
In the chat, John asks real quick, Suzanne, perhaps you can speak to this. Did Eudora resent the endless award ceremonies?
the endless what?
Award ceremonies.
I think she grew. She said at one point, "I've just had too much awarded me,"
Mhm.
and Ken said something of the same thing. And I think she was grateful for the awards, and she did go to receive all those honorary degrees for the most part, but it was wearing on her. Yeah, and I think it was not her favorite thing to be the sort of center of attention and have everyone flocking around. That was not her thing. Yeah, but I think she appreciated the awards as he did. Um, I wanted to talk about that too because there's so much travel mentioned here. She is gone from home a lot. She goes to Santa Fe. She goes to Bryn Mawr. She goes to Hollins College. She goes to Washington, D.C. for National Council on the Arts meetings, to Texas for National Council on the Arts meetings. She goes to New York, and she goes to Europe.
Mhm.
And so I was seeing here that when she was gone, let me see the travel. I listed the months. She was traveling in February, April, May, June, and July, all of June and July, and November. So she's on the road, on the road, as Charlotte used to say, a lot. Well, what about all of that travel? What do you make of all of that? Yeah, Monica?
Actually, I have a question about that. And first of all, I mean, I'm 15 years younger than she is here now, and I cannot imagine traveling that much. I like have felt I'm like, wow, I can't do things the way I could when I was 30. Um, so bless her. Could you talk about the National Council of the Arts? What did they do? What was she doing in those meetings? Were there other
They
it sounds like there
evaluate,
were, I mean, on the one hand, like it would be great to be around a lot of people that, you could have interesting conversations with, but it's also committee work.
yeah, it is. And they were really evaluating proposals and awarding money for grants. Uh, and um, and I think Eudora grew weary of that.
And
And
she made reference to like not wanting to have to deal with the money part. And I think other people were dealing with the money part. But yeah, it does.
yeah, she
Yeah.
hit it off.
Important work, but exhausting work.
Yeah, and it was frequent. That's one reason she was traveling so much. Yeah. Harriet.
Yeah, she says, I belong in another part of the program about her work on the council, a reader of candidates' books and projects, not a voter on money. And she is very involved in going into the world. I think in a period where she's losing her closest friends, and is interested in being with people. In is I mean, we can regret it, and wish she had stayed home and wrote and written during that time. But she is, while she complains about it and it's in her way. And there are some wonderful moments where they, talk about being too much in duty, rather than in privacy. But I think she's in a point of her life where it's also important to have new connections.
I was going to say too, my experience with grief is that it kept me from concentrating. She has lost Dermot Russell, who was a tremendously close friend, confidant, and who was the most trusted reader of her fiction. And he's gone. And I think in the same way that the loss of family members silenced her, the loss of Dermot probably did as well. And one way of coping with that is to take to the road, and to involve yourself with lots of people. And so
he's been her, in many ways, a kind of first reader for a long time, which means that she's thought of him as audience, and has written to him in a certain sense. And he's gone. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that it's not resolved easily or quickly.
No, I was going to say too about awards. I mean, she'll get the Raven Award. It's not from the folks who are giving the Edgars. So I mean, the awards keep coming, and some of them are delightful, but they're also a lot of something to endure as she finds herself in situations that are not always comfortable.
The Raven Award from the Mystery Writers of America is the one award she displayed in her house. So It's still there. Yeah. Joe Ellen.
Yeah, thanks. Do you know what year the Raven Award was? Was that after the Macdonald Review?
I think it was 85.
Yeah,
Correct,
after
85.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I was just going to ask, really, whether people know why she kept why she was on all of these committees. I can understand earlier that, and I'm pretty sure around 1950, she was on a Pulitzer committee. And my husband has done a fair amount of work on that, especially in relation to John Hersey. And there's all kinds of correspondence. And they were sent hundreds of books to read, which I think Welty stated not everyone could. And it sounded like she hadn't read very many, but they were all voting. And the nature of these committees was very political. Now, later in her life, she really didn't need to be on the National Council of the Arts and traveling every month. She might have been encouraged to get her name out there earlier, but I wonder whether anyone has any insights into that. I mean, we mentioned all the reasons that she might travel, but that seems like a nuisance travel. I mean, she might have seen
I think
friends.
she highly respected Nancy Hanks, who invited her. But Eudora served as a judge on local literary contests, which she didn't have to do. So part of it was, I think, a sense of duty. Yeah, Harriet.
There's also the financial aspect of some of this travel. I mean, we think of, I'm just thinking back to
Especially in the 50s and 60s.
her letters from her mom, yeah, who were saying, we need to fix the house this way and that way, and how much money, where are you publishing, and could you get things in magazines, and those visits to schools and lectures are bringing in some money. It's maybe not an issue in these years.
I do think Joe Ellen's question raises an interesting point, though. It's, to what extent is she not able to write because she has all these travel obligations?
Mhm.
To what extent is she taking the travel because she doesn't feel able to write?
Mhm.
And it's a way of
Mhm.
avoiding a very painful writer's block.
Real quick, we have another interesting question in the chat. It is specifically for Tom. This commenter says, I noticed in the December 3rd letter that Ken repeats telling Eudora the name of his new puppy when Sky, I believe, when both he and Eudora have discussed the pup by name in earlier letters. This small repetition made me curious about when Ken's eventual diagnosis of Alzheimer's was discovered. If time allows, could we speak to the timing of this as we read their letters?
Well, this sort of thing became, I don't know if this is an example of that really, or just an example of how, when you're writing a lot of letters, you don't remember maybe. And if he repeats the dog's name, well, so be it. But it did become apparent in later years. And then you could really see it, like when he would make a list of people to receive copies of his books, of his new book. He sent it to his publisher, his publicist at the publisher, and Eudora's name would be on there, maybe twice. John Leonard at the New York Times Book Review, he might put his name in there twice, and he actually might get John Leonard's name wrong. He might put somebody else, and he'd have to be right. So that sort of thing did start to happen, but not for a few more years. Yeah.
Yeah, there are minor repetitions here. I've noticed it, but then I think that's what I was wondering too, Tom. So I'm glad you addressed that. How much of that is a sign of what's coming, or how much it is just what normally happens with everyone in writing, that you forget what you've said in a letter and you put it in again. For instance, Brad Darack, he talked about him, he's not young, he's 53. He did that in two different letters. Yeah.
Speaking of awards, Suzanne, could it be okay if I talked about this one?
Oh, this is the one I gave to Tom.
This is from 2016. This is the Archer Award for Meanwhile There Are Letters, the best book not awarded an Edgar. 2016.
Oh, nice.
I bought that for Tom. I also have one just like it.
And this is the only award that I have on display.
But I did go to the ceremony, to the Mystery Writers of America ceremony. I loved being there. And so Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was there, and I could hardly wait to get to him to shake his hand. But he was the only person that everybody in the room could see because he was taller than everybody else in the room. So we could find him.
we were both going to UCLA at the same time.
Yeah.
Lou Alcindor.
Yeah.
And I remember one morning walking across the quad, and there was one figure coming towards me, and it was he.
Yeah. So my friend Susan Shan's got my picture with him. I was proud of that. Okay, we're off on a tangent here. Joe Ellen.
I have to maintain the tangent for a minute. At a short fiction conference in Iowa City, I was on an elevator with a couple of basketball players, the ones I considered the shorter players from watching television, and my head was still cranked up. So that's real height. I just wanted to mention one more thing that we haven't drawn attention to, at least again. Very early on in the correspondence, Welty is alluding to the pain in her hand, especially the right hand. And that, when did that really set in to bother her? I noticed that she just hasn't mentioned it for a couple of years anyway, and she just seems to write right through it a lot. I know she types some, but she was writing longhand from the road and that kind of thing. But when does that really become a factor? And was that something she was waiting out?
I'll have to go back and look, but when she gets an electric typewriter, it's because of the arthritis.
Whenever we mention the change from the electric or from the manual to the electric in our tour script, that always happens prior to the publishing of The Optimist's Daughter. She would have been facing the bookshelf to the opposite of the plantation desk prior to its publishing. And then she changed to the electric and was able to see the plantation desk, thus describing it in.
I think that's after The Optimist's Daughter. Yeah.
Well, perhaps we need to change the tour script, Suzanne.
Well, we'll look it up and get the exact date. But I know
Absolutely.
that I moved here. I typed some for Eudora because she was having trouble typing. So that would have been probably after I was at Millsap. So, but maybe even before, maybe in 85, 86, I might have typed a few things for her because the pain in her hand. So that was difficult. And I tried to get her to think about using a tape recorder and having transcribed. And then when the computer, I also suggested the computer, but neither suggestion was accepted yet.
We say also on the tour that she did not like the electric typewriter because she says that its humming made her feel pressured to write.
What's the date of that letter? It's a letter to William Maxwell, I think. I'll find it and I'll get you the exact dates. Right.
That'd be great. I'd love that.
Yep. All right. So what about this writer's block? Ken says, we all write on the verge of silence. We all write on the verge of silence. And he was having trouble even then, Tom, wasn't he, right now doing the material for the Blue Hammer from the start? He was.
Yeah. Of course, he lived his whole life, or half his latter half of his life, on the verge of silence, during telephone calls and things like that. But yes, he was starting to notice a problem in his writing. He was having mental difficulties, if you will, creative difficulties. And in the Blue Hammer itself, Archer is having similar kinds of noticings about himself. And there are parts where he goes in somewhere and he just plumps into an easy chair, lets his mind unwind and unravel and not think about anything at all. He describes it as a very pleasant sensation. Mm-hmm.
Eudora was struggling. She was trying to write a novella she called Last of the Figs, or Nicotiana, and she just could not bring it off. And at one point she thought she could join it to some material, and this is material from the 50s. So she went back to material from the 50s, tried to bring it off, and she thought she could join it to some material from the 1940s, which would be pre this story, and then with the story The Demonstrators, and it would be a sort of trilogy. And she never was able to bring that to completion. Now, Harriet's worked a good bit with that. Did you want to talk about that in writer's block?
I wasn't going to. I was going to say, I think Shadow Club, is the thing that's, she keeps coming back to.
That's still to come. Yeah.
Yeah. But so she's working. I want to say that she's working, and some things are more finished than others. I think that The Last of the Figs is actually pretty finished. When she has that type copy she added some pages to the end, but she is not. She doesn't bring these things to publication, and she is. When she collects the collected stories, she is asked to put in 2 uncollected stories, which she's been thinking of as part of this project of a next thing. It, in some ways, it scrabbles her plan, and then she gets into things like alterations and fictions that are, that's a title, or one with things that many of these things have many titles because they're not yet finalized. But I was thinking about
The key point, though, is she's always writing,
she is.
but she's not finishing. Yeah.
But she's not finishing. She's not bringing things to publication. And part of it too, I think, is the era of her wanting to write about issues of race, which is certainly true of The Last of the Figs, and being a white writer in Mississippi who is maybe not the publisher not ready necessarily to have her speak on this topic. In a very private and personal way, as she is talking about an artist living with her mother and their relationship with the woman who takes care of the house, with a Black woman who comes to take care of the house, and but I was going to say that I think my comment was going to be about Ken and Ross Macdonald getting things done. I mean, it is true that they're talking about writer's block, and there are those couple of letters from Eudora that are that make my hair stand up with her sense of her despair coming through about writing. But on the other hand, he's working on Blue Hammer, and it's coming together and will come together. And the anthology's out, and she says, they wanted you to be an editor for your name, and then when you make your selections, they want something more ordinary and less literary. And what's that about? But I was thinking about his comment about working on the Blue Hammer and what he's not willing to say. And I just want to read that, and I want to ask Tom about it because I never quite understood this. The idea I'm working on goes back more than 20 years, but of course I can't tell you what it is. It's about a painter, which isn't strange. There are a number of painters in my family, as I mentioned in my speech. My late uncle, Stanley, retiring from his professorship at the Ontario College of Art, went to Mexico and had a show in Mexico City when he was in his 70s. The strange and central secrets of his life I cannot tell you, at least not here and now, not until in my 70s I go to Mexico City and write my autobiographical novel full of strange and central secrets. So the Blue Hammer will come out, and it will be about an artist, Richard Chantry, whose painting has gone missing. But this Uncle Stanley, do you know anything more about Uncle Stanley, Tom? And what's the connection there?
Well, just from little wisps of remarks and other letters from much, much earlier and to different people in the family. And he did speak about it to an interviewer named Paul Nelson, but he made him turn off the tape. And so you don't really know. But I believe that Uncle Stanley had mental issues, mental health problems. And I believe he may even have been committed for a while, for a significant period. And I believe that, was he married? That his wife waited for him. At this point, I'm kind of projecting, but when he came back on the tape with Paul Nelson, he was saying something like, "And she waited for him all those years." Isn't that a beautiful story? So that's the best I can do. But he was a good artist, and his work was known. And there's kind of echoes of him, in a sense, in the Blue Hammer, because there's a painter. I think there's a painter in the Blue Hammer who's like a Latin American or a Mexican painter or something. There was a modern painter that Uncle Stanley met in, I'm sorry, I can't think of his name, but he lived in Santa Barbara, and he did some art for, anyway, what what am I trying to say? There's a character, I think, in the Blue Hammer who's somewhat influenced by this modern artist who lived in Santa Barbara, and whose name at least was somewhat similar to the character.
I was
But
just,
I'm
yeah,
sorry, this man, Stanley met this man in Mexico, and I think maybe he took a class from him or something. And the fellow said, you're a modern artist in spite of yourself. Yeah.
I was just thinking about how an aspect of the relationship is Ken's beginning to talk autobiographically. He says that maybe it is Eudora's sympathetic nature that is increasingly turning him towards a kind of autobiographical impulse. And I'm thinking about how many times in the letters he is moving there, begins to talk about things that we don't know a lot about, but he's pointing towards, as he talks about his parent, the book on California Dream that he reads, and his parents, and
He talks about going to San Francisco because of that difficult time in his life, back to that
yeah,
time when Linda
he's
disappeared.
counting on California to cause him to pain him into writing, and that it will. As he's thinking about the years of looking for when Linda disappears, and those couple of years in San Francisco. I was just thinking about how he becomes responsible for Welty collecting her essays and her letters, maybe, and she's becoming responsible for the book that'll come out, Ross Macdonald's self-portrait, Ceaselessly into the Past, which is a collection of both of us, of his autobiographical essays. Although it's really Ralph Sipper who is the wonderful friend who pulls that collection together, I think. Is that right, Tom?
Yeah. Well, she inspired him, sure. I mean, he would be inspired by that sort of thing. And he was also inspired by Christopher Isherwood had written a book about his parents, I believe. And he made reference to that. Maybe that's later in our letters book, that he was thinking of writing something really, a book about his parents. And the pain of the Bay Area, I think, is also pain of his parents. That's where he was born, after all. And he was referring to that, I think, as far as difficulty in writing. Well, and also the book of this sort of autobiographical collection of pieces. He wrote those pieces to introduce these different anthologies that he had convinced Knopf to put out, and for other occasional things, And that, I think, was where he first began to have difficulty and notice difficulty in his writing, because they had to be factual, and he had to remember names and places and events. And he remarked, if not to Eudora, then to other people, how very, very difficult it was becoming for him to write that specific kind of nonfiction piece, to put all these pieces together and have assemble them into something accurate and readable.
He remarks several times about his sense of escaping Canada. And for those of us who are living right now, we think of the Canada as a place they might escape to, rather than escape. What's your sense of why he found Canada something that needed to be escaped?
Oh, there are lots of issues, but someone like him living there felt very provincial, and also felt they were living in the shadow of England, the empire, the Commonwealth. Mm. And also, despite having ordinary love for where you live. He felt that it was not really a fully realized nation in its own right with its culture and so on. I mean, it took them a long time even to develop and then to appreciate their own literature. You know, in the 30s, this Malcolm Lowry. No, I'm sorry. There was a writer who, is that his name, Malcolm Cowley?
Cowley.
Yeah. He was the only person apparently who was, you know, trying to write sort of literature and short stories and that sort of thing. Anyway, Ken didn't really think that Canada was a first-rate kind of literary place or cultural place, political place. And also all the pain in his life, you know, was associated with Canada. He grew up poor, he had to struggle, batted around from this relative to that. His mother had mental issues, and so forth and so on. And marrying Margaret, getting out of there, going to Michigan was a great relief. And then to California seemed like, in a way, a lot of salvation. Although when he got to California, he thought this was a barren cultural wasteland. This was worse than Canada in some ways. So a lot of reasons that he would refer to the pain of Canada.
I think this whole movement towards more autobiographical writing fiction is true of both Ken and Eudora in later life, and they're going to talk about it more and more in the letters. And she's going to really encourage him as a way of coming to terms with experience to write more autobiographically.
And he did write a wonderful thing called Winnipeg. Well, we called it Winnipeg 1929, I think. But he wrote a couple of sections, which make a nice, wonderful vignette, sort of about going to Winnipeg and living with his aunt, who was married to a very dubious character, sort of a gangster, actually. I guess he had carried a gun in his car and had to do with the rackets and so on. And that we were able to publish as a pamphlet included in a collection of short stories. But that was what he was trying to do. He was trying to write some kind of autobiographical fiction, if not an actual novel.
Joe Ellen.
We've kind of strayed from what I was going to mention, but I want to during this year, I was struck by some of the kind of pithy statements that Ken would make from time to time, and maybe related to what Tom was saying. He talks about the shifting of creative heartlands. The South seems to stay fairly steady, but he also was writing in Los Angeles when that was a hot place to be writing. We live out our lives in terms of very few people, which I think is something I want to remember as we go on. But then I wanted to mention what he says about detective fiction, about the ascent from the Gothic novel. And when I was looking at my notes of some of these things later, I misinterpreted his note or his statement about struggling with plot means struggling with meaning. And I thought that he was probably engaging in a defensive plot and himself as a plot writer. But I looked back on page 227 when that occurs, and more fully, the context is, I am struggling with my plot, which, as you, Eudora Welty, remind me, means struggling with my meaning. I think it is that a very strange and difficult and even terrible that life can feed an art. But where can emotion derive from? I hope. And he quotes Wilfred Owen, the poetry is in the pity.
Eudora says, the plot is a metaphor for meaning.
Yeah.
That's what she says. And I think that's what he's referring to. And so to not have the plot worked out is to not have your concept of what you're trying to say.
Yeah. And that made me think of the mention by Tom that in Blue Hammer, Ken creates a Lou Archer who's sitting and stopping and thinking. And Ken is doing a lot of sitting and stopping and thinking, I think.
Mhm.
I want to mention one thing about the Walker got cut out of his
Yes.
anthology, but he was glad that James M. Cain, The Baby in the Icebox, got put in. When Tom and I were working on the book, I went back and read that story. It's a great story, The Baby in the Icebox, so I recommend it to you. Having said that, I cannot remember the plot. I'll have to go back and read it again. So, I think that we are out of time and we haven't covered everything, but there you are. We'll try to catch up. I wanted Melissa to talk about V.S. Pritchett because there's some mentions of V.S. Pritchett in here, and V.S. Pritchett himself becomes a great friend of Welty. So we might do that next time, and we'll continue. Anna, anything you need to say before we stop? We
Can you
can't
guys hear me okay?
now.
Can you
We
guys
can.
hear me? Okay. Another thing that we might pick back up on, there's an interesting comment in the chat. So we might talk about psychoanalysis and the interest in that and the impact that has on the autobiographical impulse as we approach these next few chapters. I see Harriet has her hand raised if we wanted to address that real quick before we get off. But other than that, we can
Let me
plan to
just
see
say
you
about
guys.
that too. We're going to talk more and more about dreams and their letters about dreams, and I think that will go with the psychoanalytic discussion. Yeah.
I wasn't going to
Wonderful.
say anything about psychoanalytic, but I was going to say that Jill Krement's photographs are interesting in this this is Krement's book, The Writer's Desk, and the cover is Eudora sitting at her desk in her bedroom when Jill rushed in to the bedroom and snapped a picture. And then
You can see the unmade bed at the bottom of the photograph. That really annoyed me.
And then there's the Ross Macdonald photo too, so where he is also in his bedroom and writing, and they're just I'm not sure she'll come back in the letters, but she was there. Jill was there as Vonnegut's girlfriend, and taking pictures of writers. Yeah.
And she
I
came.
think there was a wonderful link posted of that in our Facebook group. So if you guys are in our Facebook group, please take a look.
I looked for that group and I didn't see it easily online. Send us the link for that on Friday.
Sure will. I'll put it in the newsletter.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much. Is there anything else that we want to address before we sign off until next week? All righty. Wonderful. We'll
Thank you
see you guys
all.
then. Thank you all so much.